Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EURO-NMD webinar on clinical trial readiness that's presented on behalf of FSH Europe. We have two speakers this afternoon. We have Nicol Voermans, who's a neurologist working with muscle diseases, and Haas, who is the Chief Executive of FSHD Europe and the European Clinical Trial Network. They'll talk a bit more about what they do. I'm Sheila Hawkins. I'm moderating this meeting, so we'll let Nicol and Ria speak, and then we'll take questions at the end. If you want to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A session, I'll look at them and then we'll take them at the end of the meeting. So if I hand over to Nicol and Ria and let them take it away.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Sheila. We indeed want to talk about clinical trial readiness as the fourth and final webinar in this series in the month of May, FSHD month. This will be the content of our talk. We'll have some introduction about the cause of FSHD and how this has led to the drug development pipeline. We'll provide some information about clinical trials in general, and then about FSHD Europe and the European Trial Network, then about clinical trial readiness, and come to our conclusion. And it will be a dynamic shared presentation by me and Ria. I think almost all of you listening today will know about the cause or the underlying mechanism of FSHD. It's an inherited myopathy caused by a mutation in the DUX4 gene. And DUX4 is a protein which is normally not expressed. And in FSHD, in certain muscles, at certain time points, this toxic protein, DUX4, is being produced. And this is an image I often use when I explain patients about the underlying mechanism of FSHD, starting from the organism, moving to cells, to chromosomes, DNA, and then RNA and the protein. This DUX4 gene contains a repeat which normally is 11 to 100 repeats in a row. And in FSHD type 1, you have an abnormal shortening of this repeat up to 1 to 10 units. Due to this contraction or shortening of this repeat, the DUX4 protein can be produced. In FSHD type 2, the shortening is less, 12 to 16 or 11, sometimes up to 20 repeat units in a row. But in addition to that, there's a mutation in the second gene, which reduces the methylation, the way the gene is being packed. And due to this second mutation, the gene can also be expressed, so the protein DUX4 can be produced. And both mechanisms cause the disease FSHD. And there's a very rough correlation between the repeat length and the severity of the disease in FSHD type 1. In the very short repeat length, 1, 2, 3 repeat units, you see an onset in childhood, and people develop mildly progressive weakness and usually start using a wheelchair in adolescence or early adulthood. In families where the repeat length is longer, 7, 8, 9, or 10 units, there is often an onset in childhood, teenage years, or adolescence with less severe weakness, and many of these patients remain partly ambulant until late adulthood. But as I said, there's a very rough correlation between this. There are many exceptions to this rule. If you think about these steps which I just explained at the different levels, from chromosome to DNA to RNA, the toxic protein and downstream effects, we have seen that companies have developed approaches to target these different steps separately. And in the right column in blue, you see different compounds which have recently been tested, such as losmapimod, or are currently being tested, such as Delbrex, or will be tested in the near future. And they all address this cascade of pathophysiology at a different level. And then how are these drugs being developed and being tested? We divide the drug development pipeline in different stages, starting with the research phase or preclinical research in the laboratory to stage 2 and 3 drug discovery and preclinical studies, and stage 4, which contain the phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. And finally, when a study compound indeed shows to be effective and safe, hopefully to a drug approval. And this is a very long period where many compounds start on the left of the screen in the pre-discovery stage in order to have one effective and safe drug available for patients on the right side of the screen. And in total, this process takes around 12 to 15 years for many rare diseases. This drug development pipeline with research, IND enabling studies, phase 1, 2, 3 trials and to drug approval is also summarized on the website of FSHD Society. And I understand that these letters are far too small to be read by you now, but it's interesting to have a look at the website of FSHD Society to see which compounds are now in different phases of this drug development pipeline. And this image does immediately show that there are many different compounds in different stages. So it's a busy research field at the moment. And when we zoom in these phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials, this is the path which is being followed in drug development for many rare diseases. I think many of you are aware of this, but some of you might not be so familiar, so I will just summarize it shortly. Phase 1 clinical studies include a relatively small number of participants. It takes up to several months, and its primary aim is to study the safety of the study drug. Once a study drug has proven to be safe, the pipeline goes further to phase 2 clinical trials, where the efficacy of the study drug is being tested. And once a study drug has a positive result in phase 2, it can continue to phase 3, which lasts for a lot longer, 1 to 4 years, and it studies both the safety, efficacy, and the right dose of a study drug. And for many compounds for rare diseases, after phase 3, there's also a phase 4 with a large number of participants. And this study usually takes place after a drug has been allowed at the market and is being reimbursed, but still the long-term effectiveness and the cost effectiveness still has to be assessed. And that is what, for example, takes place for some of the SMA drugs currently. The principle in a phase 3 study is that it's designed as a randomized clinical trial, or RCT. And I think many of you will have heard of this. And the concept of an RCT is that the group of participants is divided into 2 cohorts, one of which will be allocated to a test group, which means that they're prescribed the study drug without the participant or the clinician knowing that it's a study drug. The other half of the participants is allocated to a control group, and they will be prescribed a placebo compound, so a fake medicine. And in the end, the outcome, so the clinical outcome of all these participants will be assessed and compared with each other to see whether the study drug has a better effect than the placebo or the fake drug. And if you are interested to see an overview of the current trials, I'm very pleased to refer you to the recording by Luciana Ronco, who's the Chief Scientific Officer of the FSHD Society, who presented on this topic in June last year in Denver at the Patient Connect meeting. She will again be talking about this topic in the meeting in Amsterdam in June this year, and there will be a recording. So I expect that the recording in the YouTube channel of FSHD Society will be replaced by the new one by July. And in approximately 40 minutes, she presents a very nice overview of the different study drugs being tested, and they all address different steps in the cascade of FSHD, which I just pointed out. And this is accessible for both patients and clinicians, and I think she's able to bring the story across in a very understandable way. If you think about this long path of drug development in the pipeline, there are many ways in which a patient and patient organization can contribute to this process. We refer to this as patient involvement. So this is not about patients participating in a study trial. It's about patients thinking about the design of the trial and about the recruitment of patients and about implementing the results in the end. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but it will be a topic where we will come back to at a later moment, and where EUPATI, a European organization, is training patients and patient organizations. And I think that's where Ria will continue.
Yeah. So this is a practical roadmap to where you can see the patient involvement during the whole process of medicine research and development. And it's been made by EUPATI, the European Patients Academy. And if you want to learn more about this, EUPATI has published several papers on this about patient involvement on different topics around the process. So there is one on R&D, about ethical review of clinical trials, about the regulatory processes, and also HTA. And you can find them on the website of EUPATI. And there's a whole toolbox about patient involvement, which is very interesting for the patients, but also for clinicians and researchers. Nicol,
Yes.
did you...
And in order for the patients in Europe to be involved in this drug development pipeline, to be involved in the process of finding new drugs, FSHD Europe was launched in 2010, so 15 years ago. And it started as a collaboration between 7 national patient organizations, aiming to provide a united, consistent patient voice for FSHD in Europe. The board of FSHD Europe invited me in 2021 to bring not only the patients, but also the clinicians and researchers together. And that's how we started the FSHD European Trial Network, a network to connect the clinicians and researchers in Europe. This network aimed to attract new experts and new talents, to co-organize the meetings preparing for trials, to strengthen the patient organizations, to work towards trial readiness of centers and trial readiness or trial fitness of patients, and to connect clinicians, scientists with the patients in FSHD Europe. And this was done or is being done with support of the existing European rare disease networks such as EURO-NMD. The development of the FSHD European Trial Network has strengthened FSHD Europe, the patient organization, and as such we were able to join the international project Mercury, which is a collaboration between pharmaceutical companies and patient organizations working towards trial readiness.
Yeah, and this is so Project Mercury is a global project involving different regions in the world, a collaboration program led by the patient advocacy organization, and really focusing on solving the challenges that stop or slow the development of delivery. So really trying to accelerate the development of therapies. And if you want to know more about this, you can visit the website of Project Mercury. Nicol already told a little bit about FSHD Europe and the European Trial Network. So currently FSHD Europe consists of 14 member organizations from 12 different European countries. We are registered as a charity organization in the Netherlands, and we aim to improve the quality of life of the patients and their families, to facilitate diagnosis of FSHD, and also to enable access treatment for all patients. This is the organizational structure of FSHD Europe. So on one side, there are the patient organizations who are the members, but there are also patient groups who don't have an official entity yet, but we are supporting them, of course. And on the other side, there are the healthcare providers and the researchers and the clinical trial sites. And we are all working together and collaborating with the different stakeholders in the field, such as the pharmaceutical industry, of course, at some point, the EMA, health technology bodies, and the payers. And I think it's very important to make it clear that FSHD Europe is a close collaboration between patients and healthcare providers. So FSHD Europe is working on different programs, and here you can see an overview of the programs. It includes a lot of different topics, such as supporting the patient organizations and education and patient registries. But for now, we will focus on clinical trial network. So the FSHD European Trial Network, as Nicol mentioned, was initiated in 2021, and several ENMC workshops have been held and resulted in different working groups, which you can see here. We have 5 different working groups. One of them is for clinical and genetic diagnosis. The second one, clinical outcome measures, biomarkers, imaging outcome measures, and recently also we have a working group for pediatrics. Some of the working groups are collaborating with the FSHD CTRN, the Clinical Trial Research Network, which is a global network. And the ETN is really working to reach clinical trial readiness. And this is not something only for the clinical trial sites, but also to reach clinical trial readiness in patients. So what do we mean by clinical trial readiness for patients? For patients to participate in a trial, often they need a genetic confirmation, and this is something that not everyone is aware of. And we want to inform patients that this is important for them if they want to participate in research or clinical trials, as well as to have an optimal symptomatic treatment. So the former webinars in this webinar series, the first one was on genetic diagnosis by Emiliano Giardina, who explained about genetic diagnosis. And the second webinar by Teresina Evangelista, she explained the International Clinical Care Guidelines, which are very important if you think about the optimal symptomatic treatment and also to have a stable dosing of other medication and have good physical activity and also a healthy lifestyle, which are all very important for patients to be eligible to participate in trials and to be aware of these things. And of course, patients can join their national patient organization or reach out to FSHD Europe to learn more about these topics and to be well informed about clinical trials. It's also very important that patients know and understand what it means to participate in a clinical trial. It's very important to explain the eligibility criteria. When can you participate and why, when not, and why is that? Why are there any criteria? Also, the burden of study visits. They have to be aware that it can take quite some time and energy to do all the visits in the hospital and to travel. They also need to understand that they are not able to share information. Things are confidential and they also have to sign for this. There could be possible risks due to, for instance, a muscle biopsy, but also maybe side effects by the study drug. and also the psychological burden of participating in a trial. I think one of the outcomes of the paper that you see here on the screen, which was recently published, is that patients quite have a burden of being in a placebo-controlled trial, because they don't know if they are receiving the placebo or the study drug. And by participating in a trial, it makes them think about their disease much more than before participating in a trial. So these are all very important aspects to take into account. And of course, it's very important to know that a trial is not a treatment, and people should know this before, and we should really manage expectations about this. And the third part is the patient registries. So it's very important for patients to get registered in a patient registry. It's a way to get informed. If you are registered, people can reach out to you. You can be invited to participate in a clinical trial or a different kind of research. But you can also receive updates by the newsletter of a registry. And of course, the patient registry is a way of data collection. It can be used for natural history studies. And there are different ways of data collection. It can be patient-reported or clinician-reported. So there are many different registries, setups, and also governance. But it's very important that patients are aware of it and also motivate them to register. And here you see some logos from some registries in Europe as an example, and there are much more than these ones. And a registry can also be used to reach out to patients and to really amplify the patient voice. And here, this is an example of a survey that FSHD Europe did a few years ago with the aim to assess the patient's reported disease burden, but also to assess the preferences of clinical trial participation. And in a very short period of time, we were able to reach out to over 1,000 patients from 26 different countries. And this is just an example showing in the right, you see the two graphs, and the upper graph, you see that this is an overview of the preferences of patients for a new therapy. So here you see the symptoms that people would like to be targeted by a new therapy, which is a very useful information, of course, for the drug development companies or academia that are working on this. So this is just to indicate that a registry can be a very useful tool to reach out to patients and to make use of their voice and have them involved in the whole process.
Yes, and in that way, that's a very nice way in which patients can get involved in the whole process of drug development, as I indicated before. And in parallel to the patients getting ready for trials, also trial sites should get ready. And a few of these aspects will be in our presentations in next slides. These registries mentioned by Ria are also very important to assess the number of patients in a specific country, so to assess the prevalence of FSHD. And here you see a small graph on prevalence studies in FSHD over the past decades in the Netherlands. And we see that the number of people with FSHD has risen. And that's not because there's suddenly much more patients, but most likely because many more patients have been diagnosed. And this information is very important if a study drug proves to be safe and efficient. Talking to the EMA will require this kind of information about the disease and how many people there are and how many people are suffering from FSHD. And here you see another graph by a company collecting information for pharmaceutical companies, also indicating the number of people with FSHD. And it shows that it has been recognized more, it's being diagnosed more often. And this is very important information for pharmaceutical companies for making their decisions in whether or not they're going to start a program on FSHD, but also when a drug shows to be safe and efficient, to talk to the regulatory agencies. And this is an aspect of what we call health economics. And health economics is about the prevalence of disease, but about many other economic aspects of disease. And as a clinician, I do not deal with that very often, but there are specialists, so scientists trained in studies on health economics, currently working on FSHD to show the total cost of FSHD. And it's not only about cost of visiting a doctor or having an MRI scan or a gene test, it's also about all the health costs which are made because this individual with FSHD is not able to socially participate in the same way, not to work as much as someone else would do, or the cost of loss of income of a parent of a patient with FSHD. And this figure shows the very many aspects of health economic studies, which are very important in the development path for drugs, which in that way are part of trial readiness. And when thinking about assessments of patients in the trial, I want to point out some general aspects about FSHD, which makes the design of trials challenging. If you think about the development of muscle strength and volume throughout life, you see a rapid growth in youth, and then over the young adult years, it is more or less stable, and starting in middle adulthood, muscle strength and volume declines gradually as a normal physiological process. And a patient with FSHD would have a similar graph, but a bit lower. So less muscle mass, less strength, and also increasing and declining again, starting in middle adulthood. And both among people without a muscle condition and among people with FSHD, there's quite a lot of variation. And if you think about a trial which is going to administer a study drug to a patient for the duration of that trial, which will be a year, maybe 1.5 years, and a study drug which is being efficient might show a very small change of the normal line of development of muscle strength in aging. And detecting such a small change is very challenging if you think about clinical outcome measures such as strength or volume alone. So FSHD has a very slow progression, and trials generally do not last more than 1 year. And the study drugs are expected to stop the progression or maybe slow it down. There will, in this period of a year, only be a very small effect of the study drug. So you need very sensitive clinical outcome measures and sensitive biomarkers to be able to detect the change. And that's why often surrogate endpoints are being used. So during the time of the trial for 1 year, you expect a clinical outcome measure such as muscle strength maybe not to change significantly, but you could detect a change in a surrogate endpoint, which is a biomarker such as fat replacement on a muscle MRI or another imaging biomarker or a biomarker in the blood. That could change significantly and predict a clinical change over a longer time period. And we refer to that as surrogate endpoints, and they are increasingly being used in trials for very slowly progressive diseases. And if we think about the trial toolbox of FSHD, you have markers which assess the underlying biological disease process on one side, which we refer to as biomarkers. And on the other side, you have the markers of functioning at the level of the patient. So we have biomarkers, which in case of FSHD include number of proteins which are being expressed more or less as a result of the presence of DUX4. We refer to that as DUX4 gene-driven expression. One example is biomarkers in the blood, as I mentioned, and often a combination of biomarkers or fat fraction on MRI. And then you have clinical outcome measures, which you can measure at the level of the individual patient, such as muscle strength by a handheld dynamometer or quantitative muscle assessment, or the reachable workspace. And then you have outcome measures reported by patients themselves, such as the FSHD high, FSHD ROTS, or the patient global impression of change. And these are not substitutes of each other. These are often used in parallel, where a biomarker in blood or imaging biomarker can be such a surrogate endpoint, which I referred to in my previous slide. I think many of you will know the Reachable Workspace. It is an automated way of assessing the range of movement in different planes. So to the side, to the front, behind the back. And this is video recorded, then automatically transferred into a range of motion. The QMA is a quantitative muscle assessment where muscle strength is assessed in newtons in very predetermined positions to prevent variability as a result of the position in which the patient is being tested. And that is time consuming, but a precise manner of assessment of muscle strength. And if you are working in a site which aims to host trials for FSHD, it's important to make your site ready. And then you're thinking about a clinical research unit where you need personnel and facilities. The trial team generally consists of a physician, a research nurse, and a study coordinator, and a physical therapist who is performing the clinical outcome measures. In the trials which are currently taking place, MRI is an important biomarker, so you will need to have access to an MRI machine and blood sampling processing equipment for the biomarkers. Then this functional testing facility, such as the QMA device, and other facilities are often provided by the sponsor, such as the Reachable Workspace, the muscle biopsy equipment, and the handheld dynamometer, or the device for the quantitative muscle testing. And if you want your site to become clinically visible, you can make sure that the registration is up to date in the clinical trial site registry supported by EURO-NMD. It's hosted at the University of Freiburg and initiated already more than 10 years ago. And I think everyone who's working in a EURO-NMD center will have a registration of their site in this registry, but make sure you ask about it and that you have your information up to date, because this is what sponsors also look at. Would you like to comment on that, Ria? Anything else?
No, I think it can be very beneficial for you as a healthcare provider, because it can save time instead of answering individual requests from industry. This is a way to navigate people to the registry, and it will save you time. And I think for industry or researchers that are looking for sites, it's a very easy single point of access. So in that sense, it's beneficial for both sides.
Yes, and I think overall pharmaceutical companies are tending to reach out to the centers they already know. And if you're a center in a country which is not yet part of FSHD Europe and your site has not hosted an FSHD trial so far, it's extremely important to have your information updated, because if they ask me as the chair of the European Trial Network, do you know any sites in Hungary, or do you know any sites in Poland? I refer them to EURO-NMD and to this registry. So to conclude, I think we have presented you some basics of clinical trial readiness in FSHD. And the key message is here that not only about trial readiness of sites, but also of patients. And in order to reach trial readiness, patients and clinicians and researchers should definitely work together. So please keep that message in mind, take that message home, and continue working on that. And then I hand over to Ria for her final words.
Well, of course, FSHD Europe is always looking for more members. We are now representing 14 or 12 different countries in Europe. So if you know any national patient organizations not already in contact with us, please let them reach out to us. And the same for clinicians. I think if you are not joining the FSHD European Trial Network, please reach out to us. We can add you to our mailing list. We can update you and send you newsletters, and in that way you can be involved in FSHD. And yeah.
Thank you. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Ria. We did have one question in the Q&A, which I'm going to feed in anyway, and then we'll take other questions if you want to put them in the chat or the Q&A. Someone asked about the Italian registry and when that'll be ready.
Oh, that's a good question. I know that the AIM group is working on it, and I think it was already open now or up and running, but I'm not sure.
The AIM is the Italian Association of Myology, and they are having an annual meeting starting, I think, today or tomorrow. So that's, if there are final negotiations to be made, that will definitely be the place. And I think there will be someone presenting on that, but I haven't seen the program. But if that is the case, there will be news on the website of the Italian registry after this weekend. And we will make sure to inform our FSHD Europe member in Italy about this question.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions? It looks very quiet at the moment, but I'm sure people do have questions. Oh dear. Maybe, Nicole, you could explain a bit more about how you see the role of the ETN in spreading clinical trials more widely across Europe.
Yes, I think what the FSHD European Trial Network has reached already is that the clinicians and researchers in Europe have come to know each other better. But this is mostly now concentrating around the centers and individuals which were already performing research on FSHD. It has helped us to work towards more consensus on various aspects. One example is, I think, that there were different initiatives working on a composite clinical outcome measure for FSHD, which can be used in clinical practice. So not only during a trial, but also when you see patients for annual checkup. And we are aiming to resubmit a new application to ENMC to bring different parties together to have consensus on this composite clinical outcome measure. And for such an ENMC workshop, we always aim to invite people who are not yet involved. So we think about countries which are not active yet and deliberately invite clinicians from these countries. And the other way through which FSHD European Trial is doing that is by strengthening FSHD Europe itself. So Ria and I attended the EURO-NMD conference last February in Essen and talked to people from countries who are not yet a member of FSHD Europe. And I think if we can reach out to individual clinicians or to patients who are interested in starting a small patient organization in their country, that is actually the best way to do it. And I think Finland is a very nice example. Maybe you want to comment on that, Ria?
Yeah, so in Finland there were a few FSHD patients who set up their own organization in a very short period of time, and it was amazing to see how they did that. And we have also some information about it on our website, like a case study. And then you see if there are just a few patients really motivated to do this, yeah, they can set up their own organization and make quite a big difference there. And they joined us within, I don't know, within a year, I think, when they
joined us very quickly, didn't they?
Yeah.
And And I think, sometimes the patients encourage the doctors and sometimes the clinicians encourage the patients to work collaboratively, and that's all really valuable. I have another question. What information needs to be on the national registries on genetic diagnosis in order to be ready for trials? Perhaps Ria, you want to talk about Paladin and the work there to develop consistent registries.
Well, so we don't see the question, but this is specifically for genetic diagnosis, I guess.
Yes.
No, I think for clinical trials, they only need to know if you are type 1, type 2, and
No, they need the result of the genetic lab, and the genetic lab needs to be certified for diagnostic testing. So it has to be a certified diagnostic test for FSHD, and also asking for the repeat number. And the registry should contain the information which was agreed on in the ENMC workshop on consensus on FSHD registry data sets. And that will be renewed, but that was published a number of years ago. And when we were performing the Fulcrum trial, what we encountered is that some patients were diagnosed with FSHD 15 or sometimes 22 years ago, and the genetic test had taken place only in a research setting at that time. And because they are from a known FSHD family, there are many more members with FSHD. Was never a doubt about the diagnosis. The clinician had never retested this in a diagnostic lab, and these people were ready to enter. And then we found out there was only this research test result, so they had to be retested in order to be allowed for screening.
that takes some time, I guess.
That takes some time. And the working group on genetic diagnosis published an article about the current state of genetic testing in FSHD. And this was commented on by Emiliano Giardini in the first webinar of this series. And the paper in Clinical Genetics also contains a link to the list of test centers worldwide which are certified for FSHD diagnostic testing. So I think that is helpful.
It's also on our website.
It's also on our website, yes. On the FSHD Europe website.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more? I can't see any more questions at the moment.
Can I comment on one other thing, Sheila?
Yes, of course, Nicole.
Because what you pointed out to in your previous comment is about how important it is to collaborate between patients and clinicians. Sometimes it's the patient initiated it, sometimes it's the clinician initiating, reaching out to FSHD Europe or reaching out to a sponsor. And that's how I do my consulting when there's a new diagnosis of FSHD in a family which is not known with FSHD yet. I do talk about a lot of the medical aspects, but then in a second appointment, I also talk about the role of the individual when being diagnosed with a rare disease. That's really something different than being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis within neurology, because it's about a rare disease, and research steps can only take place when patients and clinicians collaborate very intensely together. And that means indeed that patients, as Ria showed in the patient involvement slide supported by Upati, patients can take their role. And it's not that everyone has to take the same role, but everyone who is diagnosed with FSHD can play a role in this process towards developing treatments. It can be as being registered in the national registry, participating in surveys being sent out, making sure that your general practitioner knows about FSHD, carrying on your information when you go to another hospital, so you make sure that you receive the optimal symptomatic treatment for FSHD, so you're optimally fit whenever you're able to enter a trial. And if you're living in a country which is not part of FSHD Europe, ask for a referral to your EURO-NMD center, so the specialized center for neuromuscular diseases within the country where you live. In general, I think second opinions in such a center are covered by the insurance in most countries. And that's a place where you have access to trials in the future. It's really about input from patients and from clinicians both.
I think that's absolutely true. I think I think for some patients, the experience of being diagnosed, particularly if they're the first person in their family to be diagnosed, is quite a shock. And I think then it's incumbent on the clinician to help them find their way through it. And I think some clinicians are better at that than others. But I think it can be a very empowering experience for some patients. And they feel that they're actually doing something to help themselves live with the condition. That's very powerful for them, really.
And it's not a comment I want to make. I always want to make comments.
That's right.
About informing the patients. And one of the things we did, for example, already several years ago when we started the Fulcrum trial, was organizing a webinar such as this, talking about what it means for patients to be a trial participants. And that was even before we had done the survey or the qualitative study among study participants. And I know from Canada, for example, Lawrence Corngood, who's a very experienced clinician and performing many trials, what they often do is when there's a trial launched in Canada, they organize a day for the patients so they can all come in, learn about all aspects of the trial, see whether they fit the inclusion criteria, after which recruitment takes place much more rapidly because they were all well informed. But they really take the time to inform patients about what it means to be in a trial in general, but also what it means to be in that specific trial. So people start in this process well informed.
I think that's really important because, in a way, I think patients are your business partners in a clinical trial, and you can't run the trial without patients. But so, in a way, you have to treat them the way you treat any other business partner, and information's part of that, rather than seeing them as kind of grateful supplicants.
That is exactly referring to the statement Ria made, a trial is not a treatment. And that's
Yes.
explained to patients because it's confusing in a way when you're going to participate in the trial, at least at our center, you will enter through the same door, you will make the same conditions, they wear the same white coat, they have the same flex hammer, everything is the same, only the rules and the language are different.
Yeah.
And, it's very important for both clinicians and for patients to be aware of that all along. It's a medical experiment taking place, of which all the people who are involved hope that it includes a positive or beneficial effect for the participant, but it is from the start till the end a medical experiment. And you should preferably, and we have discussed this among members of FSHD Europe, you should preferably not participate because you think you're going to have early access to treatment, but because you want to contribute to the knowledge and hope that this will contribute to treatments in the future. But there's quite a big chance that it's not going to be effective. So if hoping to be treated early is your only motivation, you have a risk of being disappointed in the end.
Yeah. And the European Patient Survey showed that, really, didn't it? That there were people, part of the motivation was earlier access to treatment. But as you say, if that's your only motivation, it's not likely to be successful, really, is it?
And it's not that you're only going to contribute to knowledge in the future, you're also going to learn a lot of it. That's what I also tell patients. You're probably going to get to know your disease better. You're going to get to know your own body better. You talk to therapists, which are not only the assessors in that trial, but also see many patients. So you get other benefits from it, but it should never be the only, you should not only do it because of the expected treatment effect.
I've got a question. So we should stop talking between ourselves. But pediatric patients are quite complex and various, but sometimes might be very affected. Why not addressing treatments also for them?
Shall I comment on that?
Yeah, you're the clinician.
Well, in many treatments being developed for rare diseases, which also occur in adulthood, they start in adults because of safety issues. And what we discussed in the ENMC workshop in November 2024, and you can find the lay summary of that on the website of ENMC, and the full summary will be published in Neuromuscular Disorders later this year. We discussed how important it is that also children enter trials. And there were pharmaceutical companies participating in part of that workshop. And what they were aiming to do is, because the treatment effect might be different in those who are more severely affected, but to have a separate arm in the treatment of people who have an onset at early age and who are more severely affected. So it not only accounts for the patients with FSHD who had their initial symptoms early in childhood, but also those who started later but are more severely affected. So we do not start in it because of safety issues and because it's a smaller group in the full cohort, but it's definitely something which is taken into account by the pharmaceutical companies. And the other aspect being discussed in this workshop, that it's very important not to talk about infantile FSHD anymore, but about the spectrum of FSHD, where some patients it starts early childhood, other in teenage years, other in early adulthood or later adulthood, but it's all part of the same spectrum, because otherwise if you get a registration for FSHD in adulthood, it might not apply to the children. That's why it's important to stress that it's all the same disease, FSHD, which might start at different ages.
And also maybe the outcome measures need to be
Different.
changed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was also discussed in the workshop.
Yeah. Thank you. Just looking for any more questions, but I can't see any at the moment. No. So.
Well, the other thing which came to my mind, Sheila, when you asked what can countries do or centers do if they want to host trials, and that is a bit late now, but at least for next year or in 2 years, attend the FSHD IRC for clinicians and researchers, so the International Research Conference, which is being held in 2 weeks in Amsterdam, and will be in America in 2026, but again in Europe in 2027. And this year, for the first time, it's preceded by a patient conference, which is called FSHD Connect. And that's an ideal opportunity for patients to become trial ready and also to ask their sites and centers to participate in trials. So getting involved in the FSHD community within Europe is a very good way of preparing yourself for that.
Yes, and I'd agree with that. You can see people who feel they're much more motivated in the sense as they get connected and feel more able to contribute to it. So it's a great support for people as well, really. Yeah. Okay, I don't think we've got any further questions. So I think it remains for me to thank Nicol and Ria for their contribution, to say how interesting it's been. And as I understand it, the slides will be available at a later date, and there's a recording made of this which will also be made available on the available shortly. So I think that's it. So thank you very much indeed. It's been really interesting. So on behalf of everyone, thank you.
And thanks to EURO-NMD and Antonio. Thank you.
Well, look, there's a heart going up the screen.